Hello everyone. Today's video is about pedigree analysis. So in genetics, we need to perform multiple crosses across many generations to understand the patterns of inheritance. However, this is not possible when it comes to humans. So scientists have developed a tool called pedigree analysis to understand human patterns of inheritance by looking at family histories.
So these are some of the reasons why we need pedigrees to study human traits. So obviously it's unethical to perform controlled mating in humans, and also we only have limited number of offspring in any given process or in any given mating between two parents. So therefore we don't have a whole lot to study about inheritance patterns in human traits. So in this lecture, we are going to learn about inheritance patterns in humans and particularly sex-linked inheritance patterns. And in another lecture, or in the second part of this lecture, we will learn about inheritance of autosomal traits in humans. So in this lecture, we will also talk about a very famous story in the British royal family, where Queen Victoria was a heterozygous carrier of this trait hemophilia, and how she contributed to pass that hemophilia trait onto his grandchildren or his children, and in the royal family, how this inheritance of hemophilia trait occurred. So when we study pedigrees, it's kind of like a family tree where we look at how many individuals or who had a particular trait and who did not. And also when we study pedigrees, we can also see who passed that trait on to the kids. Or in other words, if there is a kid affected with a certain condition, from which parent did they inherit it from? Okay, so by looking at a pedigree, we are able to learn all these different patterns. And when it's a pedigree, remember that it doesn't always have to be about a disease or a disorder. It can also be a simple common trait like eye color, or maybe it's about skin pigmentation or something. Okay, so therefore, usually it can be applied to any trait, but when we look at pedigrees, where people use these kind of pedigrees in genetic counseling, they mostly look at pedigrees with relation to inheritance of certain genetic diseases. But remember that we could draw a family tree or a pedigree for any given trait. So in a pedigree, we usually use these pedigree symbols, and for males, we use squares, and for females, we use circles, and the shaded ones usually indicate that that particular individual has that trait. So if it's a disease, we call them that they are the affected individuals. So these are some of the other common pedigree symbols. So sometimes carriers or heterozygotes for a recessive allele, we could shade them, like shade half of the symbol, but usually this is not given in the type of pedigrees that I'm going to discuss with you. But if you see some pedigree with partly shaded symbols, that might indicate a carrier of a recessive allele. And then deceased individuals can be crossed off like this. And also these vertical lines usually indicate generations, and the horizontal lines indicate mating. And obviously we use numbers to indicate if we want to refer to a specific individual in the pedigree. It's easier if we number them. So the numbering system in pedigrees use Roman numerals for generations, and then Arabic numerals to indicate individuals. So if I say generation 2, individual number 2, that would be Roman numerals 2 and Arabic numerals 2. So this is just an example of a pedigree that a figure from your textbook. So this figure kind of shows pretty much most of the pedigree symbols that we discussed so far. So this is a typical pedigree where even the deceased individuals are indicated here. But remember that all these symbols may not be there in all the pedigrees that we look at. But most often we will use the same symbols, the circles, the squares, and the shaded versus um, clear symbols, and these numbering system. But then these deceased individuals or the heterozygous carriers may not be always indicated in a pedigree.
So before we look at the inheritance patterns, let's try to draw a pedigree using the pedigree symbols that we discussed just now. So this is a very simple pedigree, but you can pause the video and try it out before you look at the answer I'm going to show you in a minute.
Okay, so if you draw it using the symbols that we just discussed, this is how it looks like. So it's a very simple pedigree. So you know that John is affected and John's parents were normal. John has 4 kids. One of them is Mary. Mary marries Ben, and they have 5 children, and 2 of the 3 boys are affected. Okay, so you can keep this pedigree because at some point I'm going to look at the pedigree again and discuss what is the mode of inheritance of this genetic trait that's in John's family.